work using the LAVIS project. Edgar was one of the first people to show the full uses of the WPA slave narratives, and has done some exciting work. Edgar?
Thanks very much, Guy. Thanks to the organizers for inviting me to attend. It's always nice to be back to the South. It's like a homecoming. There is a handout circulating which gives you the structure of my talk and a couple of additional references, which I won't be spelling out just in the interest of time, so please make sure you grab one. I don't know whether some of you remember this out here. I probably shouldn't be displaying an Auburn t-shirt in Alabama, but Tom's around someplace living proof of the fact that the hybridity is in fact a possibility. What I'm trying to show is things have a history, and this history is important to all of us because it defines who we are, where we come from, part of our identity. And that's one motivation, in addition to studying language change and its principles in linguistics, to disclose earlier records and to study the origin of vernaculars, which has been one very strong trend, I think, in variational linguistics for the last decades in Creole studies, and also with reference to the American South, where there's been quite a number of work done on earlier varieties and emergence, as we just heard from Michael, of course, as well. There's always the problem of sources. Historical records tend to be few. They're unsystematic. They're sort of retained by chance. They're questionable in reliability, so it's not that easy really to overcome these difficulties, the validation and assessment. And I'm arguing that it would be useful to have a kind of more principled, broader basis for something like that, to go beyond anecdotal approaches of collecting bits and pieces. So the purpose of this paper is, in a sense, to suggest a combination between the study of earlier Southern Englishes and corpus linguistics, which some perceive as a new subdiscipline in linguistics. And then I'll present two existing electronic text collections, corpora of a black and a white variety of earlier Southern English, and I will be illustrating a couple of possibilities. That's really just essentially exemplary in many ways. I'm not going in depth into anything. A few words on the background. As we just heard, there's been a lot of work being done on the history of Southern English, both for African American English and for the white dialect varieties. You all know about the ongoing 30 years old by now discussion on the emergence, the origins of African American English, whether or not this goes back to an original Creole. More recently, the discussion has focused upon the trajectory of change in work by Walton and others in the divergence hypothesis that's been suggested and all that. And there's also been the issue of timing when innovations that are characteristic of present-day African American English came up. Patricia Sucre-Avila and a couple of others, including Guy, suggested that similar to Southern white Englishes, this seems to have been a relatively recent development, at least with respect to a couple of salient features. There's a lot of work been going into assessing sources. I've listed some of the possible sources on earlier varieties in here. This is just illustrated. Similarly, the origins of white Southern English have been under discussion, most particularly the question of to what extent their Southern English is British in character, it is a product of process of transmission as against innovation, and also when Southern English began, as we just heard. Bailey suggests that it's essentially a post-emancipation process generating a Southern identity under threat, whereas Michael just suggested that this needs to be pushed back a little earlier. In another paper, I suggested building upon an idea by Peter Tradgill that in fact we might be talking about, and I think they might be talking about, two different kinds of, or at least conceptions of Southern English, which we might be calling something like traditional Southern, that's the earlier one, the transmission kind of variety, and possibly New Southern, which is the recently vigorous changes that you find especially in the speech of the urbans and the young. Corpus linguistics is a discipline which is extremely popular in some circles of linguistics, less so in the United States, if I see that correctly. It's about the compilation and analysis of large electronic text collections, a discipline which does have American roots. The first electronic corpus ever to be produced was the famous Brown corpus by Kutra and Princess. The late Sidney Greenbaum suggested the compilation of ICE, the International Corpus of English, and Chuck Meyer of UMass is one of the leading figures nowadays. But essentially the entire discipline seems to be a European stronghold. There is an association called ICANE, International Computer Archive of Modern English, with a website that I've cited here. They run an annual series of conferences. They publish a journal. So this is, at least in the circles that I work in, a very popular methodology. Much of this is about how to compile corpora properly, what the principles are to secure reliability and validity, what the size of collections should be. Also about principles of corpus analysis. You get appropriate software which provides you with concordances, and that's very handy. Also word lists, frequency counts. Stylistic differences are usually analyzed via text genre differences that are taken to be representative for different styles. And in that sense, there's also an inherent relationship with the study of language variation and change, as the Helsinki group, if you know about these people, has documented most clearly. I'm listing some software down here that you may be interested in that helps to analyze electronic text collections. Some of the major existing corpora that are available for bona fide research. And the last few years I've also seen the publication of a few textbooks that are very useful for a survey and an introduction to these approaches. And I'm suggesting that the study of Southern English in a historical perspective and corpus linguistics should lend themselves to a mutual partnership, as in general historical linguistics has benefited a great deal from corpus linguistics. I think there are at least two parallel aspects that make these two disciplines inherently related. One is both handling characters, that is, you don't go to the field and collect audio recordings which you have to transcribe. There's no phonetics. Historical texts have come down as written evidence, as Michael pointed out, and computers are best, at least the present software that we have, when it handles texts that is character-based evidence, and that fits together very neatly. And also, of course, both disciplines deal with finite sets of text, very large ones, but nevertheless finite and in some sense representative collections. Which is one reason, I think, why, and this mutual fit is one reason why the association that I just mentioned renamed itself a couple of years ago from Archive of Modern English to include Archive of Modern and Medieval English. A lot of work in that framework has been historic in nature, and I'm proposing that this is an avenue of research that should also open itself to the study of Southern English. I'm discussing two corpora that you may or may not have heard of somehow. The first one in particular, Michael and I published an article about already a couple of years ago in American Speech. That's the SPOC, the Southern Plantation Overseers Corpus, product of a collaboration between Michael and myself. Michael found these texts and unearthed them in archives all across the South, and at Regensburg University we keyboarded, turned them into an electronic corpus. They were proofread. Michael consulted with historians to make sure difficult passages became legible, and now they're largely available in electronic form. As I said, some of this has been presented earlier in an article. I brought you a copy of one original that shows you what the original manuscripts look like, and the same letter then in the form that you find it nowadays in the transcribed and keyboarded version. And this particular text, for instance, suggests a couple of points of linguistic interest, like in the third line, "you was," or further down, two examples of studying possible grammaticalization. On account of, here is still on the count of alteration, is a very nice spelling further down. It terminate is a zero, third singular S grammatically, and notice the spelling of no somewhere between N-O-W, which doesn't mean very much in this particular context, I guess. The second corpus is the product of a major research project that we carried out for a couple of years at Regensburg University. Essentially, that's the work of Uli Mithana, who sends his regards to those who still know him. He attended a couple of NWAs and gave papers on this corpus and this work, which is almost complete by now. We compiled blues lyrics, transcriptions of blues texts, mostly from the early phase of country blues recordings from the 1920s and thereafter, and turned these into an electronic text collection, which you now can also search by means of all the software.